Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and let us know. If you love stories about justice, hidden power, and karma served perfectly, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to the world. Now, let's get into it. I'm sorry, but people like you simply don't stay in the presidential suite. That's what Thomas Winters said, his voice dripping with condescension as he looked down at the modest-dressed Latina woman standing at the front desk of the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago. He thought he was protecting his hotel's reputation. He thought he was maintaining standards. He thought no one important would challenge him. But the woman he was dismissing with such casual cruelty wasn't just any guest. She was Elena Vasquez, the newly appointed CEO of Apex Hospitality International, the corporation that owned not just this hotel, but 247 luxury properties across 6 continents. And by the time this Friday afternoon was over, Thomas Winters would learn the most expensive lesson of his career: never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book can rewrite your entire story. The lobby of the Grand Meridian was a monument to old-world luxury. Soaring marble columns stretched toward a ceiling adorned with hand-painted frescoes. Crystal chandeliers, each worth more than most people's houses, cast a warm golden glow across the polished floors. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and fresh lilies, carefully arranged in massive vases throughout the space. It was the kind of place where power brokers closed deals, celebrities hid from paparazzi, and the merely wealthy came to feel special. Elena Vasquez had arrived at 3:47 p.m. on a crisp October afternoon, pulling a single rolling suitcase behind her. She wore jeans, expensive ones, but jeans nonetheless, a simple white blouse, and comfortable flats. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a worn leather messenger bag over her shoulder. At 34, she looked younger than her years, with warm brown eyes that missed nothing and a quiet confidence that came from having climbed from night shift housekeeper to corner office in just 12 years. She had deliberately dressed down for this visit. This wasn't supposed to be a formal inspection. Elena had been flying into Chicago for a healthcare conference at McCormick Place when a red flag had appeared in her morning report. Guest satisfaction scores at the Grand Meridian had dropped 18% over the past quarter, with multiple complaints about discriminatory treatment and unwelcoming staff attitudes. The corporate investigation team had recommended a formal review, but Elena had a different approach. She wanted to see the hotel as a regular guest would see it. She wanted the unvarnished truth. She got it faster than she'd anticipated. As Elena approached the gleaming mahogany front desk, she noticed the immediate shift in body language from the 2 staff members behind it. A young woman named Rebecca, according to her name tag, was helping an elderly white couple with their checkout. She was all smiles and warm efficiency, recommending restaurants, calling for their car, treating them like beloved grandparents. The man at the second position, Thomas Winters, was in his early 50s with silver hair styled with aggressive precision. His navy suit was impeccable, his gold name tag proclaimed him guest services manager, and his face wore the expression of someone who had just smelled something unpleasant. He was looking directly at Elena, and his eyes performed a swift, dismissive scan from her casual shoes to her makeup-free face. "May I help you?" he asked, the words technically polite but the tone suggesting he thought she might be lost or looking for the employee entrance. Elena smiled, setting her suitcase upright. "Yes, thank you. I have a reservation." Elena Vasquez. Thomas turned to his computer with visible reluctance, his fingers moving slowly across the keyboard as if the very act of looking up her name was an imposition. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the reservation details, and Elena caught the flash of confusion followed quickly by suspicion. "It says here you're booked into the presidential suite," he said, not looking at her. "For 3 nights. "That's correct," Elena confirmed. Thomas looked up, his expression now openly skeptical. "The presidential suite is $4,500 per night. Plus tax." He emphasized the amount as if Elena couldn't possibly understand what those numbers meant. "I'm aware," Elena said evenly. And it says the reservation was made through our corporate office? Thomas's tone suggested this was somehow suspicious. Not through a travel agent or booking site. Yes, that's right. Thomas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. The friendly professionalism he'd shown the couple at the next counter had evaporated entirely. I'm going to need to verify this reservation. We've had issues with fraudulent bookings lately. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. Fraudulent bookings? In your presidential suite? You'd be surprised what people try, Thomas said, his eyes doing another dismissive sweep of her appearance. The presidential suite is reserved for dignitaries, celebrities, high-level executives. It's our most exclusive accommodation. We can't just let anyone, he caught himself, but the damage was done. The unspoken anyone like you hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca, the young woman at the next counter, had finished with her guests and was now watching the exchange with growing discomfort. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, clearly not willing to challenge her superior. I assure you, my reservation is legitimate, Elena said, her voice remaining calm despite the heat rising in her chest. If you'd like to call your corporate office to verify, the number is. I don't need you to tell me how to do my job, Thomas interrupted, his face flushing. What I need is additional identification, proof of payment method, and a valid reason why you're booking our presidential suite. The last request was so far outside standard hotel protocol that even Rebecca looked shocked. Thomas, she whispered, we don't usually. Rebecca, perhaps you could help the guests in the lobby, Thomas said curtly, dismissing her without taking his eyes off Elena. I'll handle this situation. Elena took a slow, deliberate breath. She had two choices here. She could reveal her identity right now, end this humiliation immediately, and watch Thomas Winters scramble for apologies. Or she could let this play out, document exactly how this hotel treated guests who didn't fit Thomas's narrow definition of who belonged in luxury accommodations. The investigator in her won out. Mr. Winters, Elena said, reading his name tag, I'm happy to provide my ID and credit card. But I'm curious, do you ask all your presidential suite guests for a valid reason why they're staying there? Thomas's jaw tightened. I'm simply ensuring our highest-tier accommodations are reserved for appropriate guests. And what makes a guest appropriate? Elena asked quietly. The question hung in the air. They both knew what he meant. They both knew what he was really saying. Thomas Winters saw a young Latina woman in casual clothes and his prejudices filled in the rest of the story. She must be using a stolen credit card. She must be lying about the booking. She must be trying to scam her way into accommodations she couldn't possibly afford or deserve. Look, Thomas said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone, I'm trying to help you here. The presidential suite might not be the best fit. We have perfectly nice standard rooms available at a much more manageable price point. Why don't we get you set up with something more suitable? I booked the presidential suite, Elena said, her voice gaining an edge. That's what I'm paying for, and that's where I'll be staying. Thomas's face hardened. Then I'm going to need to speak with my general manager before I can process this check-in. Fine, Elena said. I'll wait. Thomas picked up the phone, keeping his eyes on Elena as if she might bolt at any moment or start stealing the pens from the desk. Richard, it's Thomas at the front desk. I have a situation that requires your attention. Could you come down? He paused, listening. No, it's a guest issue. Potential fraud. Another pause. Yes, I'll wait. As they stood in uncomfortable silence, other guests began arriving for check-in. A businessman in an expensive suit stepped up to the desk, and Thomas immediately shifted his attention, his face transforming into a mask of professional warmth. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back to the Grand Meridian. I'll be right with you, just finishing up here. The businessman glanced at Elena, then at Thomas, and something in the dynamic made him uncomfortable. Take your time, he said, stepping back. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Elena remained at the desk, standing with quiet dignity while Thomas made a show of shuffling papers and helping other guests, always keeping her in his peripheral vision as if she might be casing the lobby for valuables. Finally, a man in his 60s approached the desk with the confident stride of someone used to being in charge. His gray suit was expensive but not flashy, and his face had the weathered look of a career hospitality professional. His name tag read Richard Morrison, General Manager. "Thomas, what seems to be the problem?" he asked, his tone suggesting this better be important. Thomas leaned in, speaking in a low voice that Elena could still hear. "We have a guest claiming to have a reservation for the presidential suite. Booked through corporate, supposedly. But something doesn't add up. I think we should verify before we—" "Did you check the reservation system?" Morrison interrupted. "Yes, but—" "And the reservation is in the system?" "It is, but Richard, look at her." Thomas lowered his voice even more. "Does she look like a presidential suite guest to you?" The words, meant to be whispered, carried clearly across the marble desk. Several guests in the lobby turned to look. Elena felt dozens of eyes on her, judging, assessing, assuming. Richard Morrison looked at Elena properly for the first time. He saw a young woman, casually dressed, standing with her single suitcase and messenger bag. He saw what Thomas wanted him to see. And for a moment, one critical moment, he made the same mistake as his subordinate. "Miss," Morrison said, his tone that of an adult speaking to a confused child, "I think there may have been a misunderstanding with your booking. The presidential suite is $4,500 per night." "I know," Elena finished. "I've been standing at this desk for 15 minutes while your employee has questioned my legitimacy, suggested I might be committing fraud, and implied that people who look like me don't deserve to stay in your best accommodations. So let me be very clear, I have a confirmed reservation. I have valid identification. I have a credit card with more than sufficient funds. What I don't have is any more patience for this discriminatory treatment." The lobby had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. Morrison's face reddened. He was a seasoned hotel manager, and he knew the sound of a lawsuit being born. "Miss, I apologize if Thomas gave you that impression. We simply need to follow our verification protocols." "Then verify it," Elena said, pulling her driver's license and a black American Express Centurion card from her bag and placing them on the desk. The legendary black card, with its $10,000 annual fee and no preset spending limit, made both men's eyes widen slightly. Thomas picked up the cards with trembling fingers, running the license and swiping the credit card. The computer beeped its approval. Everything was legitimate. Everything was exactly as Elena had said. But instead of apologizing, Thomas's face twisted with a new expression, resentment mixed with embarrassment, a dangerous combination. He'd been wrong, and now he was being made to look foolish in front of his boss and the entire lobby. "The card is valid," he admitted grudgingly. "But Richard, we still don't know why she's really here. The presidential suite has been used for corporate espionage before. Remember that incident with the competitor last year? We should get Ms. Vasquez checked into her room immediately," came a new voice from behind them. "And then we should all have a conversation in your office." Elena turned to see a woman in her 40s approaching the desk with purposeful strides. She wore a sharp black pantsuit and carried herself with unmistakable authority. Her name tag read, Jennifer Hayes, Director of Guest Relations. Jennifer had been watching the entire scene unfold from the concierge desk across the lobby. She'd seen Thomas's dismissive treatment, Morrison's failure to immediately correct it, and Elena's dignified refusal to back down. More importantly, Jennifer had taken one look at the name, Elena Vasquez, on the computer screen and her heart had nearly stopped. Because Jennifer Hayes did something every morning that Thomas Winters and Richard Morrison apparently did not, she read the corporate newsletters. And yesterday's newsletter had featured a prominent announcement about the new CEO of Apex Hospitality International making surprise visits to properties across the portfolio to evaluate guest experience and staff performance from the ground level. The announcement had included a photo. A photo of Elena Vasquez. Ms. Vasquez, Jennifer said, her voice tight with controlled panic as she reached the desk, on behalf of the Grand Meridian, please allow me to personally escort you to the presidential suite. Your luggage will be brought up immediately, and we've arranged a welcome amenity that I think you'll appreciate. She shot a look at Thomas and Richard that could have melted steel. Gentlemen, my office. Now. Thomas's face went from red to white. Wait, Vasquez. But that's the name of our new CEO, Jennifer finished. Yes, Thomas. This is Elena Vasquez. The woman who owns this hotel. And you've just spent the last 20 minutes accusing her of fraud, questioning her right to stay here, and suggesting she doesn't belong in our presidential suite. She turned back to Elena, her expression a careful mask of professionalism over pure mortification. Again, Ms. Vasquez, our most sincere apologies. This is absolutely not reflective of the Grand Meridian's values or standards. The lobby was utterly silent now. Every guest, every staff member, everyone who had witnessed the confrontation was now staring at the unfolding disaster. Smartphones had appeared, recording the moment. This would be on social media within the hour. Elena looked at the three staff members, Thomas, whose face had gone gray and whose hands were visibly shaking, Richard, who looked like he might be sick, and Jennifer, who was at least trying to salvage the situation with professionalism. I'll check into my suite, Elena said quietly. And then yes, we'll have that conversation. The presidential suite of the Grand Meridian occupied the entire 42nd floor and was accessed by a private elevator that required a special key card. As Jennifer Hayes rode up with Elena in painful silence, she mentally prepared for the end of her career. She'd been director of guest relations for 6 years, had transformed the property's guest satisfaction scores, and had genuinely loved her work. And now it was over, destroyed by Thomas Winters's bigotry and Richard Morrison's spineless complicity. Ms. Vasquez, Jennifer began as the elevator climbed, I want you to know that I've filed multiple complaints about Thomas over the past year. Guest complaints, specifically. Complaints about his treatment of minority guests, his assumptions based on appearance, his. And yet he's still working here, Elena said, not unkindly. Still in a guest-facing role. Still allowed to treat people this way. Jennifer had no response to that because Elena was right. She'd filed the complaints. She'd documented the incidents. And Thomas had received nothing more than verbal warnings because he was efficient with paperwork, showed up on time, and Richard Morrison didn't want the hassle of firing and replacing him. The elevator doors opened directly into the suite, and even in her state of controlled fury, Elena couldn't help but appreciate the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. The living area was larger than most apartments, furnished with museum-quality pieces. A grand piano sat near the windows. The dining table could seat 12. It was, objectively, magnificent. It was also completely meaningless in the context of what had just happened. I'll leave you to settle in, Jennifer said. Unless you need anything immediately. What I need, Elena said, setting her bag down on the marble-topped entryway table, is for you to gather Thomas Winters, Richard Morrison, your head of HR, your chief of security, and anyone else involved in training and oversight of guest services. I want them in a conference room in 1 hour. And Jennifer? She met the other woman's eyes. I want you there too. You're not in trouble. You tried to stop this. But I need your perspective on how this hotel has been running. Jennifer nodded, relief and dread warring on her face. 1 hour. Conference room B. After Jennifer left, Elena walked to the windows and stared out at the gray waters of Lake Michigan. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally hitting her system. She'd maintained her composure downstairs, but up here, alone, she felt the full weight of what had happened. This wasn't new. She'd faced prejudice her entire life. Growing up as the daughter of Mexican immigrants in a Texas border town, she'd been told she'd never amount to anything. Teachers had placed her in remedial classes despite her straight A's. Guidance counselors had steered her toward vocational training instead of college. When she'd gotten her first job in hospitality, cleaning rooms at a budget motel, the manager had patted her on the head and said, "You people are good at this kind of work." She'd worked night shifts while taking business classes during the day. She'd learned every role in a hotel, from laundry to front desk to event coordination. She'd earned her MBA while working full-time as an assistant manager. She'd climbed ruthlessly, brilliantly, proving herself at every level until Apex Hospitality's board had appointed her CEO 6 months ago. And still, apparently, she could walk into one of her own hotels and be treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin and the way she dressed. Elena pulled out her phone and called her chief legal counsel. "Marcus? It's Elena. We have a situation at the Chicago property." 1 hour later, Conference Room B on the second floor of the Grand Meridian was filled with the most terrified staff members any of them had ever seen assembled in one place. Thomas Winters sat at the long table looking like he might cry. Richard Morrison kept wiping sweat from his forehead. The head of HR, a nervous woman named Patricia Coleman, clutched a file folder like a shield. The chief of security, a former Chicago police officer named James Rodriguez, looked deeply uncomfortable. And Jennifer Hayes sat with her spine straight, ready to finally speak the truth. Elena walked in exactly at 5 p.m., now changed into a tailored charcoal suit that left no doubt about her authority. She carried a tablet and a leather folder. She sat at the head of the table and didn't smile. "Let's start with the obvious," Elena began, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute power. "Thomas, you racially profiled me. You saw a Latina woman in casual clothes and you assumed I didn't belong, couldn't afford the presidential suite, and was potentially committing fraud. Is that an accurate summary?" Thomas opened his mouth, but only a strangled sound came out. "Let me make this easier," Elena continued. "Was there anything about my reservation, anything at all in the actual data on your screen, that gave you legitimate cause to question its validity?" Thomas shook his head mutely. "So your concern was based purely on my appearance and your assumptions about who belongs in luxury accommodations?" "Yes. I was just trying to protect the hotel," Thomas whispered. "Protect it from what?" "From legitimate guests. From people who don't look like your idea of wealth." Elena's voice remained level, which somehow made her words more devastating. "Thomas, I've read your file. You've had 17 guest complaints in the past 18 months. 17. All but 2 were from minority guests who felt discriminated against. Why were you still working in a guest-facing position?" Richard Morrison finally found his voice. "Ms. Vasquez, I can explain." "Can you?" Elena turned her full attention on him. "Because from where I'm sitting, Richard, you enabled this behavior. You received those complaints from Jennifer and others, and you did nothing. When I was standing in your lobby being publicly humiliated, your first instinct was to side with Thomas, not to defend your guest. You saw what he saw, someone who didn't look right for your establishment, and you made the same prejudiced judgment." Morrison had gone pale. I made a mistake. I should have handled it differently." "Yes, you should have. You should have apologized immediately, personally escorted me to my suite, and dealt with Thomas privately. Instead, you compounded his discrimination with your own." Elena opened her leather folder. "Do you know what the most damning part of this is? I reviewed your staff training logs this afternoon. This hotel hasn't conducted anti-discrimination training in over 2 years. You're legally required to do it annually." Patricia Coleman, the HR director, looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. "We've been meaning to schedule that. It's been a busy period, and protecting your guests from discrimination wasn't a priority," Elena finished. Patricia, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. The room went silent. Patricia stood on shaking legs and left, James Rodriguez following her to ensure compliance. Elena turned back to the remaining staff members. Here's what's going to happen. Thomas, you're terminated. No severance package beyond what's legally required. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding, it was a pattern of discriminatory behavior that multiple people warned you about and you chose to ignore. You don't get to treat people like that and keep your job. Thomas stood, tears streaming down his face. Please, Ms. Vasquez, I have a mortgage, I have kids in college, I can't. You should have thought about that before you decided my skin color determined my worth, Elena said, her voice like ice. Security will escort you out as well. After Thomas and Patricia were gone, Elena turned to Richard Morrison. The general manager sat frozen, waiting for the axe to fall. Richard, you have two choices, Elena said. Option 1, you resign, effective today. You'll receive 6 months severance and a neutral reference. Option 2, I fire you for cause, with no severance and a mark on your permanent record explaining exactly why. You have 60 seconds to decide. Morrison looked at her, then at Jennifer, then back at Elena. If I resign, what happens to the staff who weren't involved? To Jennifer and the others who tried to do the right thing? It was, Elena thought, the first remotely decent thing she'd heard him say. Jennifer is being promoted to general manager, effective immediately, Elena said. She'll have full authority to rebuild this staff culture from the ground up. She'll also receive a 30% raise and equity in the hotel's performance bonuses. Jennifer's eyes went wide. She hadn't expected that. So, Richard? Elena prompted. Resignation or termination? Resignation, Morrison said quietly. I'm sorry, Ms. Vasquez. Truly. I should have done better. Yes, Elena agreed. You should have. Over the next 3 days, Elena stayed in the presidential suite and conducted the most thorough hotel inspection of her career. She reviewed every staff member's file. She read every guest complaint from the past 2 years. She ate in the restaurants, visited the spa, tested the room service, and paid attention to how staff treated various guests based on their appearance. What she found was both encouraging and damning. The majority of the Grand Meridian staff were professional, capable, and genuinely committed to hospitality. But there had been a rot at the top, Richard's indifference, Patricia's incompetence, Thomas's prejudice, that had infected the culture. Good employees like Jennifer had been fighting an uphill battle, their efforts to improve things constantly undermined by leadership that didn't care. Elena also discovered something else. Thomas Winters had been creating a hostile environment not just for guests, but for staff members as well. 3 housekeepers had filed complaints about his treatment of them, derogatory comments about their English skills, assumptions about their immigration status, jokes about knowing their place. All complaints had been dismissed by Richard Morrison as personality conflicts. By Monday morning, Elena had a plan. She called a mandatory all-staff meeting in the hotel's grand ballroom. 247 employees gathered, whispering nervously. Word had spread about what had happened at check-in on Friday, about the new CEO being treated like a criminal, about the firings and resignation that followed. They didn't know what to expect now. Elena walked onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom. She wore a simple black dress, no longer disguising her authority but not flaunting it either. She looked out at the assembled faces, front desk clerks and executive chefs, housekeepers and concierges, maintenance workers and spa therapists. This was her real audience. These were the people who made or broke a hotel's reputation every single day. Good morning, Elena began. I'm Elena Vasquez, CEO of Apex Hospitality International. For those who haven't heard what happened on Friday, let me be very direct. I arrived at this hotel as a guest and was racially profiled by members of management. I was accused of fraud, had my legitimacy questioned, and was treated as if I didn't belong here, all because of my appearance and prejudiced assumptions about who can afford luxury accommodations. The room was utterly silent, tension crackling in the air. I'm telling you this, Elena continued, because I want you to understand something crucial. If it can happen to me, the person who literally owns this hotel, imagine how often it happens to guests who don't have my resources or authority to fight back. Imagine how many people have been made to feel unwelcome in this building because they didn't match someone's narrow idea of what wealth or success looks like. She paused, letting that sink in. Over the past 3 days, I've reviewed the operational history of this property. I've found evidence of systematic discrimination, not from all of you, but from enough people in positions of power that it created a toxic culture. That ends now. Effective today, the Grand Meridian is implementing new policies. Elena clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on screens around the ballroom. First, mandatory quarterly anti-discrimination and unconscious bias training for all staff, with documented attendance and comprehension testing. Second, a confidential reporting system for both guests and staff to report discriminatory behavior, with investigations handled by an outside firm, not internal management. Third, zero-tolerance enforcement. One proven incident of discrimination and you're terminated. Not warned. Not reprimanded. Fired. She advanced to the next slide. Fourth, we're establishing a diversity council made up of staff members from all levels and departments. This council will have direct access to me and will advise on policies, training, and cultural issues. Jennifer Hayes will chair it, but I want voices from housekeeping, maintenance, food service, every area of this operation. She clicked again. Fifth, every guest complaint related to discrimination will be escalated to me personally. Not to the general manager, not to regional management, to me. I will review every single one and make sure it's taken seriously. Elena turned off the presentation and looked out at the assembled staff. Here's what I want you to understand, hospitality is not about physical buildings or luxury amenities. It's about making people feel valued, respected, and welcome. Every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity, whether they're wearing a designer suit or jeans and sneakers, whether their credit card is black or debit, whether they look like your idea of wealth or not. She saw heads nodding, saw people sitting up straighter. To those of you who have been trying to maintain that standard despite poor leadership, thank you. Your professionalism kept this property afloat. To those of you who haven't lived up to that standard, this is your notice. Change or leave, because there's no middle ground here. The meeting ended with cautious applause. Staff members filed out, some looking relieved, some looking worried, all looking like they understood the magnitude of what had just shifted in their workplace. Jennifer Hayes approached the stage. That was perfect, Ms. Vasquez. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet, Elena said. You've got the hard part, changing the culture day by day. That's not a speech or a policy. That's showing up every day and proving that we mean what we say. I won't let you down, Jennifer promised. I know, Elena said. That's why you got the job. The Grand Meridian's transformation made hospitality industry news. Guest satisfaction scores had jumped 34%. Staff retention had improved dramatically. The hotel had received recognition from multiple civil rights organizations for its comprehensive anti-discrimination policies. Other Apex properties were adopting the Chicago model. Thomas Winters, meanwhile, had struggled to find work in hospitality. His termination and the reasons for it had followed him. He'd sent Elena 3 letters of apology, each more desperate than the last. She'd read them all. She'd felt no satisfaction in his suffering, but she'd also felt no obligation to rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. Richard Morrison had taken his severance and retired early, moving to Arizona to be near his daughter. Patricia Coleman had found work at a small motel chain in a reduced capacity, her career effectively over. But the real story, the real 8th story beneath the surface, was in the thousands of small moments that happened every day at the Grand Meridian and across Apex properties. It was in the housekeeper who felt comfortable reporting a manager's inappropriate comment and saw that manager disciplined. It was in the front desk clerk who greeted every guest with genuine warmth, regardless of their appearance. It was in the family that checked in wearing modest clothes and left a review saying they'd never felt so welcome at a luxury hotel. Elena Vasquez had turned her moment of humiliation into systemic change. She'd used her power not for revenge but for transformation. And while Thomas Winters's discrimination had been exposed and punished, the greater victory was in ensuring it would be much harder for the next Thomas Winters to thrive in her properties. The eighth story, the story beneath the surface, was that prejudice thrives in systems that allow it. And the only way to kill it was to change the system itself. On the 6-month anniversary of the incident, Elena returned to the Grand Meridian for a formal visit. This time, she wore one of her signature suits. This time, she was greeted with genuine warmth and recognition. Jennifer Hayes gave her a tour of the changes, new training facilities, a revamped employee break room with resources on diversity and inclusion, a wall of thank you notes from guests who'd been treated with exceptional care. As they walked through the lobby, Elena noticed a young Latina woman checking in at the front desk. She wore jeans and carried a backpack. The front desk clerk, a new hire named Michael, greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome to the Grand Meridian. I see you're booked in our Lakeview suite. That's one of my favorite rooms in the property. Let me get you checked in, and we'll have you up there in no time." No questions about how she could afford it. No suspicious glances. No judgment. Just hospitality. Elena caught Jennifer's eye. They both smiled. "That," Elena said quietly, "is what success looks like." And in a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago, in one of hundreds of properties across a global portfolio, the culture had changed. Not because of a viral video or public outcry, but because one person had experienced discrimination, had the power to do something about it, and chose to use that power wisely. Thomas Winters had thought he was protecting his hotel's standards. Instead, he'd exposed their complete absence. And in doing so, he'd inadvertently become the catalyst for making every Apex property a place where everyone, regardless of how they looked, how they dressed, or what assumptions others might make about them, could truly feel welcome. That was the real karma. That was the real justice. Not in his suffering, but in the good that came from his failure. Thank you for watching this powerful story about prejudice, power, and the importance of systemic change. When Thomas Winters judged Elena Vasquez based on her appearance, he had no idea she was the CEO who could change everything. But the real story isn't about one man's downfall, it's about how one incident of discrimination became the catalyst for transformation across an entire hotel chain. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to the 8th Dattery for more tales of justice and redemption. Let's build a world where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or where they come from.